In today's Adobe Illustrator tutorial, you will learn how to create low-poly thumbs up with lights, particles, glowing and dispersion effect. You will see how to create low-poly mesh with pen tool and how to adapt to your artwork by adding second layer of low-poly mesh to it. Then we'll also create 4 different types of lights using blend tool, gradient and blending modes. In the end, we'll add glowing by applying Gaussian blur to simple vector shape. This tutorial is dedicated to first 1000 subscribers who supported this channel. Thank you guys! You're watching TNT tutorials, let's move on and create a new document. Select Print, A4, Horizontal Orientation, in Advanced Options select RGB and click on Create. You can download colors, reference and sketch by the link in the video description, create layers for them, place them like so. After you download the swatches, open your swatches panel, click here, then select Open Swatch Library, Other Library. Then you'll see this little menu with our low-poly swatches. Just click on this folder and it will appear in your swatches panel. Close this menu. Now create new layer. Let's rename it to low-poly base. I will use this sketch, but it can be any object you want. You simply need to have some silhouette. So now with fill color icon selected, let's click here on None, select Stroke, Swatches, and let's pick this color. P for pen tool, and let's redraw this sketch, like this. You don't want smooth lines, you should create rough lines like this. If you will need to delete some point, you can press Ctrl Z to undo, and simply continue. Use space for hand tool to navigate. Then pick A for direct selection tool and move some points if you think that you need to. I will hide sketch layer. Now as we have this silhouette created, let's create background, create new layer, rename it to background, click here to swap fill and stroke, select fill color icon, M for rectangle tool, and build rectangle like this. Let's bring this layer down, like so. Now open gradient panel, select radial gradient, double-click on this marker, select swatches, pick this bright color, now double-click on this marker and pick darkest color. G for gradient tool, and let's just build gradient like this. You can play with gradient tool like so. If you want to make gradient more smooth here, just place it a little bit far from our artboard, like so. You can also do it this way, just increase its size and play with this marker. You also have this slider, so you can use it also. I'll stop on this result, lock this layer, just click here. Now we will create a lot of objects, and the main thing that you'll learn today is how to keep full control on your vector artwork with hundreds of layers and feel comfortable with it. So let's start with drawing low poly, create new layer, rename it to low poly. Let's bring this layer up. P for pen tool, click here to swap fill and stroke, swatches, select stroke here, and apply this color. To build low poly, we'll create triangles and sometimes rectangles. Just do it like so. Connect this shape. I recommend you to build few objects like this. To have some starting points, feel free to experiment, you can delete some triangles if you don't like them, A for direct selection tool, pick points, move these points, like this. The main thing in low poly is that you always want to snap all points. So for example, we're snapping this point here, we're creating some kind of triangle, and we will snap this point. Now connect these ones, always connect final points to have triangles, because this will allow you to control your artwork. After you will have a lot of objects created, you can pick A for direct selection tool, select points, and just move them all together to change design. So just create triangles like this, see what works for you better, connect some points, let's create some kind of rectangle here. Connect these points. As you can see, I could simply draw a line here to make rectangle, but I've created full rectangle with all sides. I did it to have better control on this artwork, because if we will decide to move this triangle somewhere here, we will still have this line here, and we will be able to change its position to something like this, for example. So let's continue. I'll press Ctrl Z, P for pen tool. This is the way to build usual low poly, and I will show you how to make it look more interesting if you will need to. If you build a shape and you want to continue build lines from this point, for example, but you can't do it because this shape is selected, and by clicking on this point, you will delete it. So just press V for selection tool, deselect this object, then P for pen tool again, and start to build object from this point. So with this method you can simply create low poly mesh through all this object. Now I will show you how to make it look more interesting. You can start to create lines through these rectangles, like this. A for direct selection tool, move lines if you need to, try different combinations, see which ones work for you better. You can simply delete some of shapes if you don't like how they look. Select a few points, move them at one time. Let's move these ones, for example, like this. As you can see, it's very easy to manipulate these points. Try different combinations all the time. If you see such moments as this, you can pick this point and delete it with pen tool. Let me show you what will happen if you will draw some objects in wrong layer. This happens all the time, so don't worry. I will create objects in low poly base. Now let's imagine that I realized that I've created shapes in wrong layer. You can simply select them like so. You can see them selected here. Just highlight this layer. Don't deselect this one. Just highlight your low poly layer. Right-click on this object. Arrange. Send to current layer. And now as you can see, they're all in low poly layer. When you want to pick this object, for example, you want to find its point here. You're trying to pick it, but you're picking wrong objects. Just select this object with direct selection tool. His points will highlight. You'll be able to pick these points and move them. Continue to find different solutions for your design. By the way, you don't need to fill all spaces between these triangles. You just need to create them and see basic design. Don't worry, for example, if you've created this rectangle, and there's a space between them. There is no triangle. Just don't worry, just create low poly mesh. If you don't want to see such rough edges here, just select all lines, properties, stroke, round join. Now as you can see, all joints are rounded. Don't build too many triangles, just make sure that your design works for you well. Move points all around. When you see such parts, you might want to connect them to other points. Or you can simply continue to connect them with other triangles that will finally lead to these border points. I see that I have too many triangles here. I can simply delete them. It's very easy to create new ones, so always try combinations. Don't be afraid to delete anything. We will have one more layer of these triangles, so let's just not get too crazy with these ones. I think I will stop with these ones here. Simply fill this part. Now what options do you have to create another layer of these low poly triangles? You can simply duplicate this layer. Let's rename it to low poly 2. Bring this layer down. Lock this low poly layer. You should also lock low poly base layer. Select low poly 2 layer. Properties. Let's make stroke width thinner. Maybe we will increase it later. Swatches. And apply this darker color. Now, as all other layers locked, that means that we can simply pick A for direct selection tool and move these triangles like so. You can change all combinations, move them differently, and you don't need to be as precise as with first layer of these triangles, because these ones are only creating depth. Let's select them by clicking here, Properties, and I will increase stroke weight. I think all 5 points will work for us better. I will move all these points around. Just do basically the same. Change positions, play with design. If you see that you need to fill some parts in first layer, open Layers panel, lock this low poly 2 layer, unlock low poly layer, Eye for eyedropper tool, pick settings from these lines, P for pen tool, select your low poly layer, and just create rectangles as we did. As you can see, nothing distracts you from creating more and more objects. You can control them all, move them as you want to, and change design of your image. And we already have a big amount of elements here. So when you're working with current layer, just lock all other layers. Now I will show you one more tip that will help you with complicated objects. Let's imagine more difficult situation when you started to create these thin lines with other color in this low poly layer. I'll simply randomly create some rectangles just so you could have idea. So let's imagine that we've created a lot of such objects here in wrong layer, and you think that you need to pick each one of them one by one with holding shift and then place them to your low poly 2 layer. But you don't need to do this. Everything is much more simple. You can just simply hide your low poly 2 layer, press Y on your keyboard for magic wand, press enter, and this menu is very important. As you can see, you can easily find objects with specified characteristics in one click. I recommend you to simply put tolerance to 0%. Now for this case, we will choose stroke color, 0 tolerance, and just click on this triangle. As you can see, all these objects are selected. Now you can make your low poly 2 layer visible, select this low poly 2 layer, right click on these triangles, arrange, send to current layer, and now they all in needed layer. If you want to hide this layer, you pick Y for magic wand, you click on these triangles, and all these triangles are selected. So just hide needed layer, select objects, then make this layer visible, and place them to needed layer. You can do absolutely the same with any object in your scenes. Just remember, Y for magic wand, select tolerance to 0, choose what you want to pick, filled color layers or stroke color layers, or maybe you want to find layers with specified stroke weight. For example, you have some strokes with 5 points weight and other strokes are 10 points weight. You need to select only 5 points weight, select tolerance here, and pick needed strokes in one click. This tool is very helpful. I mentioned another ways to create second low poly layer. You could just simply create this layer, lock low poly layer, and draw these triangles like we did with first layer. You have even one more option. I will hide this low poly 2 layer. You could create these low polys, then simply randomly select some triangles, like this for example, create new layer, rename it to low poly 2 also. Let's just imagine that we didn't create this layer. With this object selected, highlight this layer, right click, arrange, send to current layer. Now these objects are here, swatches, change color for them, and change stroke weights to 0.5. Let's see what we have here. We have also some great results. So it's up to you which way to choose. Just keep them all in mind. I will press Ctrl Z and make our low poly 2 layer visible, just to have more lines. Next thing that we want to do is to create new layer, rename it to Fill. Click here to swap fill and stroke, and with pen tool, simply fill some of triangles. I will fill this part. Now select gradient, select fill color icon, linear gradient, double click on this marker, pick this color, double click on this one, pick the same color here, and change opacity to some low value. It can be even 0%. I will set it to 30%. Now with this object selected, G for gradient tool, and play with gradient direction. You can also go to properties and change opacity here. I'll change it to 55%, like so. If all these options didn't apply to your new shape, let's imagine that it's still in solid color. You can select it, I for eyedropper tool, and pick on this object. Now G for gradient tool, and change gradient direction. You can add as many parts as you want. I'll simply add a few more. Now before we started to create lights, let's just break this part here. A for direct selection tool, unlock all these layers. Let's just imitate some broken polys. Unlock low poly base layer, select it, C for scissors tool. I will click on this point, A for direct selection tool, and now I can move these points like so. Let's just imagine that everything falls apart. Create some broken line here. Just create elements and then you will be able to play with them. A for direct selection tool. Change proportions here. You can make such gaps in any part of this image. And now let's create lights. Lock all these layers. Create new layer. Rename it to lights. And let's just create 4 different types of lights here. And then we will simply duplicate them to all this artwork. Let's begin with first one. Click here to swap fill and stroke. L for ellipse tool. Draw ellipse like this. Now with this ellipse selected, properties, offset path. If you can find offset path action in this window, go to object, path, offset path. Click on preview. These values really doesn't matter right now. It can be anything. So click OK, swatches, apply darker color. In this case, it's very important to apply different colors to ellipses, because other way this method won't work. So with this ellipse selected, properties, offset path again, click OK, swatches, and apply even darker color. Now select them all, object, blend, make. Nothing special is going on here, but what you can do now, A for direct selection tool, pick this one, properties, and change opacity to 0%. Now with the same direct selection tool, pick this one and you can play with opacity of this ellipse. It always depends on situation, so you just need to keep in mind these tips. They need some experimenting and experience. With this one selected, you can make it smaller. To select it, A for Direct Selection tool, select it, V for Selection tool, and change proportions, like this. You can also change proportions of this one, like so. A for Direct Selection tool, V for Selection tool, and change proportions of this one. You might ask, why do we need this ellipse if its opacity 0%? Try to delete it, and you can see that there's no smooth transitions, only hard edge. So Ctrl Z to undo, and all you will need after this is to play with these values. You can simply leave this light aside, and then in your artwork you'll be able to just duplicate this light, and each time you can change its proportions. So each light would look a little bit different. Some of these lights can have such large spread. So you get the main idea, you can experiment with it. Let's create second type, just duplicate this one. Simply press Ctrl C, Ctrl F, Properties, Opacity, and select Color Dodge. Now A for Direct Selection tool, pick each of these ellipses and play with their proportions, the same as we did with first one. You can simply select this copy and make it smaller or bigger, like so. So again, each time when you will add some lights, you'll be able to change its proportions. Keep in mind that you can simply also just make all these objects smaller, and you will have small lights. So second type is done. Let's create another one. L for Ellipse tool, just draw ellipse, gradient, radial gradient, select this marker, and set opacity to 0%. We've applied this swatch's color to these markers, the same color for these ones. You might ask, why do we have the same color for this one and for this one? We do this just to have smooth transition. If you will apply different color here, in some cases you might have some rough edge here. So just apply the same color and play with this slider. To make it look more interesting, Ctrl C, Ctrl F, and make copied gradient smaller, like so. Play with this slider again. Now let's play with these settings, and you can have light like this. What you should also keep in mind, that you can play with colors of these lights. Each time you can simply pick some ellipse, color, and change color to any color you want. Let's click here, select RGB, and pick this color. You can also change colors for other ellipses. So this is the way how you can create different unique combinations for your design. Just experiment and make your own decisions. I will press Ctrl Z. Now let's group these ones also. Copy these gradients. Ctrl C, Ctrl F. This is our fourth method. Properties, opacity, and color dodge again. You can also play with screen mode. I will apply color dodge here and play with these values. Let's pick this ellipse with Direct Selection tool, gradient, double click on this slider. Let's click here on color. Let's make this one bigger. Let's double click here again, play with these values here. And you can see that after you applied color dodge and you change this color to white, you can have some really great results. Now what you need to do is just to play with settings. Now we have this kind of lightning. Play with proportions, see what works for you better. Play with proportions of this ellipse and of this slider. You can also change opacity of this one. Or if you think that this color is too bright, just make this color a little bit darker. Now as you know these 4 ways, you can experiment with them and apply to your artworks. Now let's just group this one. Now let's duplicate this slice through all artwork. Just see what combinations work for you better. change light settings. You can make them all look different. You can simply make some of them smaller like that. Let's duplicate other ones, make them smaller. I see that I can make some more contrast in this gradient. Let's just do it like so. Let's pick this one. And do basically the same, like this. What you want is to place this fill layer to the top of lights layer, because sometimes you will have lights in these places, like this, and you don't want them to be on top of these parts. Let's duplicate darker lights in places like this. If you've placed light to this point and you see that it needs to be on top of this part, all you need to do is to create new layer, rename it to Light 2, select this light, highlight this layer, right-click, Arrange, Send to Current Layer, and bring Light 2 layer to top of Fill. Now you have some lights behind Fill layer and some lights above. This makes your work more flexible. To duplicate these lights easily, just press Ctrl C, select this layer, and press Ctrl V. Place them here, and just duplicate these lights behind these parts and use these lights to place them anywhere you want. When you're using bright colors, just don't use them too often. Place them in certain places, because in other way your work will look like some glowing bunch of lights. You don't want that. You want your design to work for you. So delete lights when you see that there's too many of them. I see that I need to place this layer to top of this part. Ctrl C, delete it here. Select Light 2, Ctrl Shift V. With Ctrl Shift V, it places right in this place. So let's just continue to duplicate all our lights. You can duplicate them right from your artwork, like this. I think you get the main idea. There was a lot of tips in this tutorial. You should keep them all in mind, because you can use them in each artwork that you create. I will delete these lights here. Now we want to add some glowing. I want to change some gradient on background. Select it, G for gradient tool, and play with gradient tool. Now let's create new layer, rename it to glow. Let's just lock lights layers, because we won't use them for now. Swatches, pick this color, P for pen tool, and just draw a simple shape like this. Don't build too many points. I recommend you to build only 4 points, because with 4 points you will be easily able to manipulate this object like this. A for direct selection tool, and change its shape. Like so. Effect, Blur, Gaussian blur. Click on Preview, set any value you want. You'll be able to change it anytime. Click OK. To change this value, Properties. Click here on Applied Effect, Preview, and change it again. Click OK. Now let's bring this layer down, like this. You can see some unpleasant moment here. We will fix it now. Properties. Change opacity of your blurring, like this. A for direct selection tool. You can change its proportions, like so. If you have such moments, let's lock glow layer, unlock lights. To fix such parts, you can simply play with color of these ellipses. Select RGB here, play with colors. It can help. Then to enter isolation mode, double-click on this light, open Layers group, first blending, select this ellipse, RGB here, and try to change this color also. Exit isolation mode and check if it helps. So you can use this tip, or you can simply delete such light and replace it with this one. So just try them out, change colors, or replace lights. Now what about glowing? Let's lock lights, unlock the glow layer. You can duplicate it to any part you want, change color anytime to any color you want. In Properties, change radius of blurring, and change shape with Direct Selection tool. Now I will show you why you should use swatch as colors in such complicated artworks. After you applied colors to all these objects, you might want to change them. To do this, of course, you can press Y for one tool as I showed you in the beginning of this tutorial, press Enter, select values that you want, or you can simply double-click on some of these colors from swatches panel that you have applied here, click on Preview, and change it. All colors will be changed automatically. As you can see, we use swatched color for background also, and this is not a problem to change any color anytime in your artwork. To make swatches work for you, each object should be created with swatches color. Don't just pick the same color as swatches, just create layer and apply color from swatches. In this case, it will work. Also, when you're creating swatches colors and you want to change them, just as I showed you, this global option should be turned on. So make sure that you have followed all these tips. In conclusion, I would say that the main thing in such illustrations is to keep layers organized. Use Pen tool to create low poly mesh and particles, create lines the way that you've learned today, and duplicate them through all your artwork. You'll enjoy the process of creating any object in this style if you'll follow tips from this video. I want to thank all the people who supported this channel with subscribe once more. Your feedback means a lot to me and inspires to create more detailed step-by-step tutorials for you. If you learned something new from this tutorial, drop a comment below, let me know if everything was clear enough for you and what you liked about this video. If this channel is new to you, you can support it by clicking on subscribe, and what's most important, by clicking on the bell icon to get notifications about newest tutorials from TNT. I would also appreciate if you'll click thumbs up and will share this video. This was TNT Tutorials, see you in next videos!